that we find that the Mishkan is a microcosm of creation. And the initial intent was that the Shechina, Hashem's divine presence, should be on the terrestrial level together with the human being. But it's only because Adam had eaten of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, which was Tov v'Ra. So when he had ingested that evil within himself, and the whole world was only created to accommodate himself, the effect of that ingestion, that evil, caused that all existence should be tainted with this evil. And because of that, God ascended from this existence, and he was no longer associated with man at that level, which was the original intent. The Mishkan was the first time that Hashem was returning to the terrestrial level on a semi-permanent basis, because ultimately the Beis HaMikdash, the first and second, was destroyed, but for an extended period of time, relatively speaking, he was associated with man. He was on the terrestrial level. So that Midrash, where we find this corresponding factor between the Mishkan and creation, is at the beginning of Pekudei. It's a Midrash Tanchuma. Omer Rav Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov, the son of Asi, says, cites a pasuk in Tehillim, which we say, Hashem ohavti ma'on beisecho. Hashem, I loved ma'on beisecho, the location, the ma'on, location of your house. Lamu omer Hashem ohavti ma'on beisecho, mishkan kvodecho. What is the house of Hashem? Mishkan kvodecho, the Mishkan of your glory. We find, this is the Midrash's words, we find that the Mishkan is the equivalent of the creation of the world. Ketzad, for instance. Bereshit Ksiv, the first day of creation, what does it say? Bereshit bara Elokim eisa shamayim v'soretz. God created heaven and earth. Uchsiv, there's a pasuk in Tehillim, Note shamayim kirio. He spread the heavens like a tapestry. So we find the heavens are compared to a tapestry. Ubi Mishkan maksiv. And what does it say regarding the Mishkan? Vosisa urias izim. You should make urios, tapestries made of goat's hides. Basheni, on the second day it says Yehirokia. There should be a sky, Vomen Havdolah, and it should separate between the upper waters and the lower waters. Shenemar, V'mavdul b'mayim l'mayim. U'mishkin siv, V'vdila paroches lochem. The paroches, the curtain separated between the holy and the holy of holies. So above, the waters above, that's the location where Hashem is. That's the Shechina. The lower waters have relevance to the terrestrial. The curtain should separate between the holy and the holy of holies. B'shlishi ksiv, mayim. On the third day of creation, it says, speaks about water. Shenemar, yikova amoyim. The world was covered with water, and Hashem said, let the waters gather and let the dry land be seen. Umishkan ksiv, v'asisa kir nechoshes. The chanu nechoshes, you should make a laver made of copper, and its base should be copper, and you should put there water. So the water in the lava corresponds to the gathering of the water on the third day of creation. B'revi bara ba'oros. On the fourth day of creation, he created luminaries. The chsiv yimoras b'rkei shamayim. U'b'mishkan ksiv, what do we find in the Mishkan? V'osisa menorah azov. You should make a golden candelabra. B'chamishi bara ophos. On the fifth day of creation, he created birds. Shenemar, quotes the pasuk. Mishkan, what corresponds to that? Lasus korbanos, the sacrifices. What are the species of sacrifices? Kvosim ve'ofos. You bring sheep and you bring birds. There's a sacrifice which is a bird. So the birds, which are korbanos, correspond to the fifth day when Hashem created birds. Vashishi, on the sixth day, Nivra Odom, God created man. Shenema v'yivra Elokim es Odom b'tzalmo. He created man in his image. B'chvod yotzro, to reflect the glory of his creator. Mishkan ksiv Odom, we find also Odom. Shu Kohen Gadol, who is the equivalent of the Odom of Adam. Before the sin, that's the high priest. Shenimshach lavod l'shamish l'fnei Hashem. He was anointed specifically to officiate before Hashem. That is his value. Now, I just want to stop here. If you remember, we discussed an ordinary Kohen is permitted to contaminate to the 7 closest relatives. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, even to his 7 closest relatives, he's not permitted to contaminate. Not permitted. The Kohen Gadol is permitted to go in the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. No Kohen is permitted to go there, but the Kohen Gadol is permitted. Now, it seems to be a little harsh that even for his closest relatives, he's not permitted to contaminate himself. So we had explained that since the Mishkan is a replication of creation, what does the Kohen Gadol represent? He represents Odom Kodem Achet. Odom, Adam, before he ate of the tree of knowledge. Before he ate of the tree of knowledge, there was no such thing as death. Death had no relevance to Odom. Adam, only after he ingested the evil of the tree of knowledge, it says, when you will eat, you will die. Meaning you will be subject to death. The Kohen Gadol represents Odom, where he's not subject to death. He has no relevance to contamination. Because of that, because every aspect of the Mishkan corresponds to creation, and we have to have representation of Adam before the sin, where that person has relevance to the Shechina at the most advanced level, that he goes into the Holy of Holies. It says he was anointed specifically lavod l'shamish l'fnei Hashem, to serve and do the service before Hashem. B'shvig, what did God do on this 7th day of creation? V'chulu Hashemayim v'oretz, it says heaven and earth were completed. U'bamishkan ksiv v'atchal kol avodah, avodas hamishkan, that the avodas hamishkan, the work of the Mishkan, was completed. V'riyus olam ksiv v'yavorech Elokim. Regarding creation, it says God blessed v'yavorech Elokim es Yom HaShvi, the 7th day. Umishkin ksiv v'yavorech osam Moshe. What is this week's parsha? It says he, after they finished, he blessed them. He blessed Klal Yisrael. And what would he say? That Hashem should, your actions, your handiwork should be pleasant in the eyes of Hashem, and it should be worthy of bracha. That's Vayivorech. So we find Moshe Rabbeinu is the equivalent of God himself giving the blessing. Like the Kohen Gadol is the equivalent of Adam before the sin, Moshe is the equivalent of Hashem giving the bracha when everything's completed. Now, it says explicitly in Chazal that when Moshe spoke, Shechina medaberes b'tok grono, the Shechina spoke through his throat, meaning he was a conduit for the Shechina, Moshe. He wasn't an independent person. Now, it's beautiful. Moshe Rabbeinu, why was he qualified to be the one to be the conduit for the receiving of Torah? Moshe Rabbeinu, his level of humility was nachnu mo. Hashem tested the fact there's no more humble person that ever walked the face of the earth other than Moshe Rabbeinu. And what was his level of humility? There was not a trace of himself. If there would have been a trace of himself, that would have been a snag. The Shechina wouldn't naturally pass through him. Moshe Rabbeinu was only a pass-through. He could only be the pass-through because what he represented, what he was only Hashem. Therefore, he was able to be the pass-through. So it says Vayivorech Moshe, when they finished the Mishkan, he blessed their handiwork. It was the equivalent, Vayivorech Elokim es Yom HaShvi, Vayikadisho. So he blessed the 7th day and he sanctified it. Moshe Rabbeinu was the equivalent. He's in the place of Hashem. We find that the Sanhedrin had 70 judges, the high court, It's called Sanhedrin Gedola, and it had a presiding judge who presided over the 70. That's number 71. Moshe Rabbeinu, initially, the Gemara says, was the equivalent of the Sanhedrin. He in his totality was that. Now, who was Moshe Rabbeinu? He was more than the presiding judge. He was the ultimate judge. He originally, before the judicial system was set in place, he adjudicated all the cases. He was at that level to pass judgment. Now, when you had the Sanhedrin put in place, you have 70. We always 70 is what is teva. That's the natural state. 8 is always above the 7. You have a presiding judge over the 70. We speak. The Gemara says in Megillah that Malchusa the Rikiyas came Malchusa the Ara. Malchusa the Ara came Malchusa the Rikiyah. That the earthly kingdom reflects the heavenly kingdom. Now we speak about Bezdin Shalmala. We speak the heavenly court. And if you read the Ramchal, what they do is they go and they gather the information. You have the prosecuting angels, you have the advocates, and now it comes to pass judgment. But who actually gives the final verdict? Hashem is the one who presides over the court. You have Malochim, and Hashem presides over that court. 70, they adjudicate it, and they discuss it, and you have the various votes. They vote, guilty, innocent. But ultimately, you have that presiding judge who's above all of them, and he gives the final verdict to make sure everything is correct. Identically, we find, if you remember, I once mentioned Rabbeinu Bachya, that the Torah tells us that when Yaakov went to Egypt, B'shivim nefesh yodu avseinu Mitzrayim, there were 70 individuals who went to Egypt with Yaakov, and Yaakov was number 71. So Rabbeinu Bachya points out that Yaakov Avinu, of all the patriarchs, was the most beloved of them, because in every sense of the word, he was a replication of Hashem's presence in Shemayim in heaven. Why? Because in heaven, in Shemayim, we find that there are 4 groups of Malachim. They're referred to as 4 Kitei Malachim, and they encircle the Kisei HaKavod, the heavenly throne, and the number of all 4 in combination is 70. And Hashem presides over all of them. They all emanate from Hashem. Yaakov himself, he himself had 4 wives. That means he had 4 groups of children. In total, the 4 groups were how many people? 70. And from who did they emanate from? They were his family. So Rabbeinu Bachya says, you see how special Yaakov was, that in every sense of the word, he was a representation of a God's presence in heaven. He reflected that structure. 70. So the presiding judge, as we say, Malchusa the Aris King, Malchusa the Rikiyah, that the earthly kingdom reflects the heavenly kingdom, that there's 70 judges, and you have one presiding judge who makes sure that everything was done correctly, and then the verdict is given. The Kohen Gadol over here is what? Is Adam Kodem Achet, before Adam sinned. He has no relevance to contamination. Therefore, he cannot even contaminate to the 7 closest relatives. Vayevorech, who blessed the Mishkan was completed, that's Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the Nachnu Ma. He was negated that there was the trace of himself. Therefore, he is a full representative of Hashem's presence. Therefore, his bracha is the equivalent of Hashem's bracha. For that reason. And why is the Mishkan, why is it a replication of heaven and earth? Just as heaven and earth, as we have Parshas Hazino, they're a testament to the Jewish people, that everything's dependent on their behavior. Hashem designated heaven and earth to be the witnesses. Whether Klal Yisrael, they adhere to the Torah or not. Mishkan Edus l'Yisrael. The Mishkan is also a testament for the Jewish people. Shenemar Eila Pekudei HaMishkan, Mishkan Edus. It is also a testament, as Rashi says in the Medrash, that God had forgiven us for the Chet Egel, and therefore He dwells in our midst. Kach nema Hashem ohavti mo beisecho mishkan kvodecho. Therefore, David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Ahavti mo beisecho. I love the location of your house, and also Mishkan kvodecho, and the Mishkan, which is where your glory resides.